Hello, welcome to Axis and Ally Stalingrad Race to Stalingrad scenario. We are going to be doing the Race to Stalingrad scenario with the out-of-the-box rules, so no rule changes, no optional rules, no alternate deployments for the city board or the region board, but I have put down some of the German and Soviet commanders and just some cool stuff on the board to make it look cooler, pillboxes, little radio towers, things like that, just to enhance it. Don't really serve any narrative purposes, just for fun. So, as you can see, I've got General Chuikov across the Volga commanding the, I can't remember if it's the 64th or 62nd Army. I'm sure someone will let us know in the comments. It's one of the two, I just can't remember which. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein is awaiting Operation Winter Storm and the formation of Army Group Dawn, so he'll come on the board when it's appropriate. General Yeramenko commands the Stalingrad front for the Red Army. General Rokossovsky commands the Don front for the Red Army. And General Vatutin commands the southwestern front. We've also got Zhuikov. I just put him in Srednyaya Aktuba just because he's overall in charge of executing Operation Uranus when the time comes. So I just put him on the other side of the Volga just to kind of signify that he's in command overall for the Soviets here. We have Field Marshal List, who is actually in command of Army Group A, charged with seizing the Caucasus for Case Blue. I don't have the marker for Army Group B's commander. So List will have to suffice, and he'll get fired at some point when they drive toward the Caucasus, separate from this game. And of course, we have 6th Army Commander General Paulus commanding 6th Army en route to Stalingrad. And then we've got pillboxes on the fortified zones. Like I said, some radio antennas just because they look cool. So here we go. Round 1 of Axis and Ally Stalingrad, Race to Stalingrad scenario. Let's see what happens. All right, we have just finished the first half of turn 1. So the Germans went. They made an assault. Several assaults across the Don, basically got locked into a stalemate, and every single one did not outright win any. So we've got contested battles all along the Don River. They do have the preponderance of forces in most of them, so I think it's just a matter of time before they break through, but they really need to urgently try to get to Stalingrad as quickly as they can. So somewhat frustrating for the German attack under Paulus. They tried to make that initial big attack and just kind of ran into a grinding battles all along the front, but not certainly winnable by all means here, probably on the next round or two. General Paulus moved his headquarters to Akhimovsky, and the Germans did lose a bomber to artillery fire during one of those assaults from the Soviets. So let's see what the Soviets do on the second half of turn 1 of Axis and Ally Stalingrad, Race to Stalingrad. Okay, we have just finished the second half of round 1 of Axis and Ally Stalingrad, Race to Stalingrad scenario. So that was the Soviet half of turn 1. The Soviets purchased an infantry to move across the Pavlov's House ferry, move some infantry and artillery around the city map, try to position themselves to simultaneously hold the fortified positions. They also airlifted some supply into Orlovka, and they got a tank built by the tractor factory inside the city and moved that to Spartanovka. So they're trying to make a good defense before the Axis forces can break into the city. However, on the region board, they were able to, especially in Ilanovka, because the Germans were there, they were able to put 3, or maybe it was 4, I can't remember now, several infantry in there to try to plug that gap and continue to hold up the armored forces. They were able to take out a lot of the infantry and or big shooting power of the German forces that are going to try to break into Stalingrad. So I think the Soviet half of that turn was really effective. They were able to basically continue to hold out wherever they are, plug some gaps where they had kind of weak defenses, and they're going to continue to try to contest every inch on turn 2 for not one step back. So right now, the Soviets are holding pretty darn well. The Germans have made no significant breakthroughs across the Don River, and they're no closer to breaking into the city than they were in the first half of turn 1. of course, and if anything, the Soviets are holding pretty good. So, again, it may be a matter of time. The Germans may be able to get some forces in there, but if the Soviets continue to whittle them down on the way in, it's going to be some pretty paltry forces getting into the city, and by then the city should be well and prepped to defend itself. So let's see what happens on turn 2. Again, we're going to have not one step back, and Operation Uranus cards are not going to be drafted or drawn yet. That's not until turn 3 and beyond. So let's see how this goes. All right, we have just finished the German half, the first half of round 2. Busy round, lots of battles starting on the region board. They continue to be grinding and stuck north of the Don River. They finally broke through and won the battle in Cote-Laban, so that'll free up that armor and infantry. Veritaci continues to grind, and then they broke through in the south in Abaganerovo Station in Tunguta. But all 7 dice from the minor Axis powers couldn't defeat 1 Soviet infantry. So Gromoslavka stays as it is in stalemate. The Axis powers did also try to attack all 3 ferries. They lost 1 bomber in the Pavlov's House ferry to artillery in the city board, but they were able to take the far side Barakati factory ferry from the Soviets and sink that. So that means the Germans are now down to 2 bombers and 2 fighters. That's not great. So let's see what the Soviets have in store on the second half of turn 2. Maybe they can continue to make it hurt outside of the gates of Stalingrad before the Germans can even sniff the city, excuse me. That was the end of turn 2, the second half, so the Soviet side of the turn. They got an infantry across the river to Pavlov's house. He moved into army camp, and they just consolidated their forces in the strongholds and along the edges of the city in anticipation of an eventual German attack into the city. On the region board, the Allied Soviet infantry attacked all this minor Axis forces. They didn't get hit, but then the minor Axis forces couldn't kill the 1 Soviet infantry again. So they prove ineffective in combat. As we know, the Germans broke through in the south. The Soviets positioned some meager forces in Beketovka to try to slow them on their way into Potomac and through the city. The Soviets attacked Kalak with armor, bomber, and fighter. They were able to destroy the German tank and mechanized infantry, but they had to lose a tank and fighter to do so. So they kept their bomber after that, but they didn't take the territory. Stalemate continues along the Don River, except for in Kremenskaya, the Germans were able to finally break through, and a Soviet rocket launcher destroyed 1 German infantry in Bolshoi. So the Germans continue to be slow and getting beat down before they even get to the gates of Stalingrad, while the city is going to be well prepared for defense, should the Germans ever get there. All right, turn 3 upcoming. The Soviets will begin drawing Operation Uranus cards. Let's see how it goes. Okay, that was the end of the first half of turn 3, so the German half. They were able to actually do some decent damage in Ilanovka, take out 3 Soviet infantry, but they lost a decent amount. So the Soviets still have the preponderance of force in there, and Germans don't really have anything else to continue to throw into that, unfortunately. So north of the Don, the 6th Army has failed to protect its left flank, essentially. They were able to take Busanovka and Potomac, bringing mechanized infantry and Stugs through from the south. They attacked Beketovka. They had a ton of firepower, 2 bombers, 3 tanks, 2 artillery and infantry. They got 1 hit. And then the daggum minor Axis forces threw another 7 dice at the unsupplied Soviet infantry and still couldn't kill him. This is unbelievable how anemic some of these German rolls have been. Paula's sitting here in Nakamovsky saying, move, get a move on. Come on, we got to get into the city. And, they're about to, but with meager forces and strong Soviet forces on the periphery, it's really not looking good for the Axis early in this game. But let's see how it continues to turn out on the second half of turn 3, the Soviet half. Alright, that was the end of round 3, so the Soviet half of the round. they just repositioned a bunch more forces along the periphery in the city and dropped some supply off in Mami of Kurgan for, maybe for the future, with their one remaining bomber from Srednaya Aktuba. Amazingly, in Beketovka, they were able to destroy an Axis unit, and the Axis, I think it was 5 dice, 3 3s, 2 2s, and they didn't kill any Soviet units in Beketovka. So they continue to hold out there. Finally, the minor Axis forces defeated the one unsupplied Soviet infantry that couldn't even defend itself, rolling 7 dice, and they only got 1 hit. Now, 1 hit's all they needed, but barely. My God, I've never seen such combat ineffectiveness. This is really astounding. The Soviets were able to finally wipe that last German tank in Ilovinska, so they're free to start moving around. So the left flank of the 6th Army is wide open, absolutely wide open. The right flank, some mopping up to do, but okay. But man, that left flank is in a bad state. So let's see what Paulus does. I think at this point he would have moved his headquarters to Potomnik. So that's where we'll put Paulus for now. Chuikov in Stalingrad has had very little to do. He's preparing defenses, digging in, waiting for the Germans to get here someday, sometime. So we will see. General Yermenko, commanding the Stalingrad front, is trying to prepare forces for Operation Uranus. Zhukov has not given the order to launch Operation Uranus yet, but they did start gathering forces. So, yeah, again, with how slow the Axis forces have been to even grind through the defense of the Don front by the Soviets, maybe not one step back proved fortuitous after all. All right, on to round 4. All right, in the first half of round 4, the Germans finally took Beketovka. So the right flank is protected by German forces there and the minor Axis allies. So the right flank is okay. The left flank still remains wide open. There's just not much the Germans can do. They don't hardly have any forces over there. So I'm not sure what Paulus is going to do about that. They landed some fighters and a bomber in Potomnik, and they were able to move forces in through Gumrak into the army camp. They assaulted there. They took the army camp, moved backup forces into Gumrak, moved supplies in there, and as you can see, there's a communication station in there. Historically, that's where Paulus's command center was throughout the at least, I don't know about the entirety of the battle, but certainly in the second half. And they were they kept getting communications lines cuts, and there was a teletype or I can't remember the name of the word now, rudimentary communication system they used to communicate with Army Group Dawn once Operation Winter Storm was ordered. But anyway, so the Germans finally made it into the city with fairly meager forces, and I realized I made a mistake. Since there is no ferry that's been rebuilt on the far side of on the northern side of the Volga River, these Soviet forces in Mechetka Ravine and Spartanovka are unsupplied, since their supply through Rhynok is cut off, and they can't supply across the river for that specific zone of the city. So I realized they're unsupplied, so Soviets will probably just build a ferry and put them back in supply. So the left flank of the 6th Army is wide open. I mean, the Soviets don't have to keep all those forces in Spartanovka. They can move them out into Rhynok, wipe aside the German division there, and sweep around into Potomnik. So we'll see what they do. They'll probably still continue to build for Operation Uranus and make it uber strong. So we'll see. But Germans are finally in Stalingrad on turn 4. Let's see how the second half of turn 4 goes. Okay, into turn 4. So the Soviets turn 4. Gumrak, both Soviets and Germans lost. And they also attacked the army camp with 4 infantry and a bomber. They did destroy 1 German infantry, but finally, a good roll for the Germans. They destroyed all 4 Soviet infantry that attacked them in the army camp. So, center of the city, is wide open for them. Again, they don't have a lot in the city, but that's some much needed good news in a game so far that's been a grinding, slow, disappointing affair for the Sixth Army so far. The Soviets did build their ferries, so put their forces in supply, and they moved the forces out of Spartanovka, attacked in Rhinoc, brought a tank down from Ilanovska as well, easily swept aside that one German division. The Soviets are staying concentrated. Instead of going west across the Don, they're going south, going straight for the heart of what is supplying the city right now, trying to stay together and make a big assault on Potomac to take that. Of course, there are some minor Axis infantry and 3 German armored divisions and artillery in Beketovka. So, by no means will they take it easily. But I still think this is trending in favor of the Soviets. They continue to build forces for Operation Uranus. So we'll see if when Army Group Dawn is eventually formed for Operation Winter Storm, whether or not it'll be able to keep the supply lines into Potomac and into the city open. The Germans, I think they kind of need to continue to put stuff in the city, but I don't think they can really afford to, if that makes sense. So, all right, on to turn 5. That'll be the German half of the turn. That was the first half of turn 5, the German turn. They actually did some pretty nifty moves to cut off supply to take Pavlov's house. I think I'm now just realizing that would have put the Soviet forces in Orlovka out of supply because they can't trace supply out of Vertachi. So that sector of Stalingrad is unsupplied for the Soviets. So let me put that up there. They were able to so take the Pavlov's house and the grain elevator, which put the Soviet infantry in right there and unsupplied, and the bigger force in Gumrak out of supply as well. So actually a pretty nifty move from the Germans, and to set up themselves up well to defend those against incoming Soviet infantry. They did lose a bomber to Soviet artillery that was joining in the attack here. Luckily, they didn't lose their infantry in that battle too, but that means they're down to 1 bomber and 2 fighters. They consolidated forces in Potomac, put the aircraft there to be able to soak up hits for the oncoming Soviet attack, and stasis in the rest of the Don region. But actually, given what they're working with, they also moved armor into Gumrak to support that. But yeah, given what they're working with, I'd say it's about as good as the Germans could have hoped at this point in the game. So, given how the rest is gone, so let's see how the second half of turn 5 goes. This will be the Soviet turn. All right, that was the end of turn 5, going into turn 6. So that was the Soviets part of turn 5. They consolidated 8 units in Vertachi for an assault on Potomac. Otherwise, not much on the region board. More stasis. They moved mechanized infantry from the region board into Orlovka to continue to support that battle for Gumrak. But this supply situation for the Soviets is really killing their ability to retake Gumrak from the Germans. They assaulted across the ferries into the grain elevator and Pavlov's house. Both got wiped out, didn't take any Germans with them. And we had stasis here in the middle. This is Southern Rail Station. But yeah, the supply situation, Germans played this real well, so they're trying to get forces from the other side of the map, tank, artillery, infantry, more across the river to continue to try to stop the bleeding there. I think the Soviets are really banking on being able to knock out Potomac at this point. And I'm debating whether or not Paulus would have moved his headquarters into Gumrak at this point or stayed in Potomac. We're going to keep him we don't want him to get captured, so we're going to say he moved into Gumrak in case the Potomac battle doesn't go well for the Germans. But the Soviets continued to prepare for Operation Uranus. They still haven't launched it, but I'd say the Germans, played this pretty well in the city. But the real test will be if Potomac's wiped out, can they reopen the supply with Army Group Dawn when that forms? All right, on to turn 6. All right, that was the first half of turn 6. We did have bad weather, so the Don River froze. Next time, the Volga River will freeze and these ferries will become ice bridges. So aircraft will not be able to participate this round, so the Germans kept their aircraft in Potomac. They were able to take out more units, Soviet units in Gumrak. They lost some mechanized infantry on the way. In Southern Rail Station, the Soviets were able to kill that one German infantry, but it remains unsupplied. So the grain elevator and Pavlov's house are still in German hands. Some meager Soviet forces are coming down from the northern part of the city, and they may end up moving forces, their Soviet divisions, from Rhinoc into Vertachi in the next round, then on the round after that into Orlovka to continue to support this fight for the western part of the city. But big assault coming into Potomac, I think, for the Soviets on this next round, and they may continue to collect Operation Uranus cards, or they may wait one more turn. We'll see. I think they're holding on okay. We'll see. It might depend how. Well, I guess we'll have to choose to launch Uranus before the Battle of Potomac. So, tough choice. We'll see what the Soviets do on the second half of turn 6. Okay, that was the end of round 6 of the Soviet half. This unsupplied situation in Gumrak continues to really hurt them. The Germans haven't killed them outright yet, but they lost more, and they're down to 1 artillery there only. They attacked Pavlov's house, grain elevator. They weren't able to take either. 1 mechanized infantry for the Germans remain in each, but more coming across the ferry. So we'll see how that goes. The German forces just got to get unlocked in Gumrak, and they might be able to help in those pivotal parts of the city. Now they bought more rocket launchers. Nothing hit, of course, but that pivotal battle for Gumrak and Pavlov's house and the grain elevator, they continue inside the city. Amazingly, the Germans must have made up for so many of their bad rolls in the beginning of the game. They lost 2 infantry in Potomac and outright wiped the attacking Soviet force from Vertachi. Now those Soviet infantry that were maybe thinking about going back into Stalingrad, well, I guess they can't really attack Potomac with their meager force, so Operation Uranus forces are going to have to finish the job, but the Germans maintain their hold on Potomac and the supply line into Stalingrad. So, pretty spectacular turn of events. You know, Axis and Allies can always surprise you. So, let's see what the Germans do on the first half of turn 7. Alright, that was the first half of turn 7. We had bad weather again, so the Volga froze. Axis just did some air unit relocation, 1 in Gumrak, 1 in Potomac, bomber back to Tatsinskaya to pick up that supply later on. Kept some forces in Potomac, moved an artillery into Gumrak to help finish that off and for follow-on operations in the city. The Soviets were able to retake Pavlov's house and the grain elevator, 2 absolutely critical places. Of course, they lost the battle for Gumrak. But now the Germans have a little bit more firepower that's finally unleashed to try to keep the some kind of maybe army camp or some kind of money territories inside the city. Hopefully keep Potomac open, trying to go for that major victory. I think total victory is out of the realm possibility for the Germans. Just taking every RP zone in the city seems beyond their ability. So now we're going on the second half of turn 7, which is Operation Uranus, so we'll have a big Soviet counterattack. So we're going to see these other fronts get in on the action. Alright, let's see how the second half of turn 7 goes. Okay, we just finished round 7, big round. That was the launching of Operation Uranus. Soviets are consolidating inside the city. Not much movement there, moving armor and artillery across the ice bridge. We'll see if the Axis has anything for them. Maybe just going for the army camp and trying to consolidate there, trying to hold that there. Operation Uranus launched. Big success in the south. They also attacked Potomac to try to soften it up ahead of follow-on Soviet attacks, and they were able to do so a little bit. I think it's a matter of time now, probably the next round until Potomac falls. Maybe another round after the Soviets get bad rolls. Had about 50% success for outright clearing the path of the German minor Axis Allied forces along the northern part of the Don River. So Operation Uranus is in full effect. Manstein's Army Group Don won't form for another 2 turns, right, until, well, I guess 3. We're about to start turn 8, so not until turn 10. So they've got a lot of money stored up. They'll continue to get a little bit more, but we'll see if Army Group Don can save the day And by then, I imagine Potomac will have a nice ring around it. So we'll see. Heating up. That was the end of the first half of round 8. Not much doing for the Germans in the city. They consolidated from Gumrak into army camp, trying to hold on to one of those RPs. They're going to do their best to maintain that and the line through Gumrak, out through Potomac, and onto a supply line. We'll see which one's probably shooting for maintaining or retaking eventually Abganarova Station, Verkhny Kumsky supply lines to try to get that major victory of holding one RP in the city and a supply line out. They were able to kill the Russian tank and infantry that were lodged in Potomac. They didn't lose anything themselves, and they airdropped some supplies in there to continue to feed Stalingrad for the future. They attacked in Bolshoi and in Kletskaya. Didn't do any hits, but the Soviets didn't make any hits on the way back either, so that'll hold them up for at least the Soviets' half of this round. And they deployed their free infantry in Oblivskaya. So not a whole lot doing, just trying to protect their future, really, at this point, and waiting for Army Group Dawn to form. So that was the first half of turn 8. Okay, that was the end of turn 8 going into turn 9, so that was the Soviet half of the turn. They were able to destroy the German forces in army camp. Now all that's remaining on the map of the city of Stalingrad is General Paulus. I think he's going to be promoted to field marshal soon. And his retinue in Gumrak. No other German forces remained on the city. I actually realized before, during those big battles for Gumrak, we had Soviet supply in Mamayev Kurgan and Orlovka. I could have spent those supply. Remember that supply situation was tenuous for the Soviets. I could have spent that supply in a couple of those rounds to have made them a little more better at fighting. So what I did was I retroactively spent the token in Orlovka and Mamayev Kurgan. I actually just dropped off another with a bomber, just in case. But and I ended up removing an Axis infantry and artillery. So all that was left at the start of this round was 3 German tanks. I figured it's not a perfect solution, but I said, well, if they weren't so hampered by supply, which they wouldn't have been, they might have been able to take out, maybe 2 more units. So I did that. I don't think it was going to sway the course of the game either way with that correction. So I figured that was a good kind of compromise. So anyway, in the city, Chuikov has all but retaken the city. Big Soviet attack on Potomac. The Germans are holding out, but of course Potomac's on supply. They do have a supply token. They ended up using one on that defense just now. That was in Gumrak. So they got another one still for another round of combat. And then the city of Stalingrad is clearly unsupplied. Again, not much German forces there to do much with that. Operation Uranus forces spread out, trying to isolate, cut off supply lines here in the south. Still held up in Bolshoi. We weren't able to take out that one German infantry division, but spreading out throughout the rest of the northern part along the Don River. So this is going to be turn 9. No Operation Winter Storm yet, but the Axis forces desperately need Operation Winter Storm very badly. So the Soviets are taking control of this game, but again, we'll see what Operation Winter Storm has to say about it in a round. And hopefully for the Germans, they can hold out one more full round in Potomac, although I don't know. Seems doubtful. Okay, here goes round 9. That was the end of the first half of round 9. Germans forced to attack, of course, in Potomac. They spent their last supply token to do so there. Took out Soviet artillery, and they lost a bomber. So they're still holding on to Potomac. We'll see if they can do it one more time. I don't know. I don't think so, but you never know. Their unsupplied infantry in Bolshoi had to attack, which means it rolled 0 because it's unsupplied. And the Soviet forces there mopped them up, so they're free to move south across the Russian steppe. And we're going to see how the second half of round 9 goes. This is clear weather, so Soviet aircraft are going to fly, probably do some repositioning, lots of movement. I don't think there'll be too much of a need to continue to consolidate in Stalingrad. They'll probably move to the edge. We'll leave Paulus on there, even though they'll move into Gumrak. We'll say he's their prisoner, I suppose, and see if Manstein can rescue him. But Yeah, second half of round 9 and then round 10. And the Germans desperately need round 10 because that's Operation Winter Storm. That was the end of round 9. The Soviet half were going into turn 10. Soviets built more armor, putting them across the frozen river, moving forces to the western side of the city to be able to exit out into Potomac once that is cleared. Armor waiting for there to be space to go in. The Germans were able to hold out with one fighter in Potomac. Paulus did end up moving into Potomac to try to avoid Soviet capture in Gumrak. Chuikov crossed the Volga. His headquarters are now in Gumrak. Zhukov is still overseeing the whole Soviet effort. Yeremenko has moved up into Bekotovka for his headquarters. Bakhtutin is all the way in Oblivskaya for Southwestern Front. For the Don Front, that is Rokossovsky. He's in Akhimovsky. And apologies, Yeremenko is the Stalingrad front commander. So we're about to have Army Group Don formed for the Germans. They're going to try to come in Tormosin and Verkhny Kumsky, but the Soviets are really looking strong across the map. They may be able to shoot for a total victory here, which, I knew it was going well for them a lot of the game. I don't know if I anticipated that well. But again, we'll see how Operation Winter Storm plays out. So here we go. Operation Winter Storm round. Desperately needed for the Axis. Alright, that was the first half of turn 10. Operation Winter Storm, Army Group Dawn was formed. They took out one Soviet mechanized infantry, didn't lose anything, brought a fighter in for the fight too. So here's the vaunted Army Group Dawn. 3 armored units, a tank destroyer unit, and 3 infantry divisions. Or honestly, at this point, I think the scale of the poverty of the German economy, I think it's more like infantry battalions at this point, with 1 RP left over and no way to get RPs at all. Nothing on the city, nothing on the region board. That, I think, is all they're going to be able to spend for the entire game. I think I could call it at this point, but it's fun to just see how far Manstein will be able to grind with Army Group Dawn. Maybe to Gromoslavka, and that might be it before his army group, if you could call it that, is destroyed. Paulus has surrendered. He's a prisoner of the Stalingrad front under Yeremenko and Chuikov. This has been super fun, but the Soviets have just done absolutely well. So well. I thought for a hot minute in there, the Germans had maybe salvaged it because they played pretty cleverly inside the city. It just wasn't enough. Cleverness can only get you so far when you're not producing enough and when your opponent just outsmarts you. In this case, I guess I outsmarted myself from the German perspective. So let's see how the second half of round 10 goes. All right, that was the end of round 10. The Soviet half, they just moved more forces around the city, did a big assault along with air power. This was they should not have been able to use air power. I did get 1 targeted hit with air power, so actually Manstein would get 1 more tank back. That was my bad. Allies shouldn't have been able to use bombers on that. But that's okay. We just fixed that. I just realized they already achieved a total victory conditions. Control or contest all territories west of the Don and control Rhinoc, Vertachi, and Potomac. So really just playing this out would just be a matter of shellacking Manstein already. Then he's been shellacked. Clearly there's no way Army Group Dawn survives this. So this has gone even worse than historical Stalingrad for the Germans. Just like in real history, 6th Army was outright destroyed and Paulus captured. But even worse for the Germans, if we play this through, literally 1 more round, that means Army Group Dawn will be annihilated too and Manstein captured. So, well done to our front commanders, Bakhtutin, Rokossovsky, Yeremenko. Of course, couldn't have done it without Chuikov's great job turning a potentially and temporarily critical situation in the city around, and under the leadership of Zhukov on the overall campaign, Paulus, well, you did what you could. Really bad rolls for the first like 3 rounds. I think those first 3 rounds guaranteed a Soviet victory in some form. Whether or not it was going to be total, of course, I couldn't see that at the time. In Manstein, well, you never even we're never getting anywhere close to Potomac and a relief force. So I guess good for history that Case Blue has absolutely, utterly failed in our recreation through this wonderful game, Axis and Allies, Stalingrad. This has been the race to Stalingrad scenario. I'm sure I've made a few mistakes. I've tried to correct them where I could and where I remembered, but I'm sure y'all will be able to help me out with anything else I missed. I hope you enjoyed me having some of these pillboxes, comms, radio towers, and the front and army commanders on here. I don't know why. I just made it a little bit extra fun, but this really is my favorite Axis and Allies game of all time at this point. So, bravo, Matt Hyra, Larry Harris, everyone at Renegade. Thank you so much for putting so much time and effort into this game. This has been a really outstanding time. I feel sad saying this. I just can't wait to play this against a friend. So, I hope you all have a great one. Thank you for sticking around, and take care.